You're not in love. You're in a rescue mission that's killing you. We call it loyalty. We call it empathy. But the truth? It's addiction. Not to them, but to their potential. Not who they are. Not who they've shown you, again and again, that they are. But the version you've built in your head. The one you swear is just underneath the surface, even if you've been saying that for years. You hold on because you're convinced that with just a little more time, a little more effort, just a little more of you, they'll change. That the person you know they can be is right around the corner. But every time you try to save them, you're the one who drowns. And the question is, how many times are you willing to go under? This isn't love. It's self-erasure disguised as devotion. It's sacrifice disguised as loyalty. Because deep down, it's not about them. It's about you. You keep giving chances to people who don't change. You keep seeing the best in people who keep handing you their worst. You call it patience. You call it faith. But it's not. It's self-abandonment disguised as virtue. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Einstein called it madness. You call it hope. And here's the truth no one says out loud. You don't fall in love with people. You fall in love with projects, with puzzles, with people who hurt you just enough to feel like home. Because somewhere along the line, you learned that love is measured by suffering, that your value is defined by what you can fix, that love wasn't something you receive. It was something you earn by staying, healing, enduring. This is the sunk cost fallacy. You've invested so much of yourself, you can't bear the idea that it was all for nothing. So you hold on, even when it's killing you. You're pushing the boulder up the hill over and over because you've convinced yourself that if you push it just one more time, it won't roll back down. But it always does. And this is only the first layer. The real cost comes next. You think you're loving them. You think you're helping. But what if your definition of love was built on pain? Not intimacy, not connection, but control, masquerading as care. The world calls it empathy. Psychologists call it codependency. But let's call it what it really is, emotional control. Because every time you try to fix them, you're not just helping. You're managing. You're rewriting. You're trying to bend reality to fit the fantasy you've been holding on to. You call it saving, but it's not. It's editing. Because you don't want who they are. You want the version you've built in your head. And every time they fall short, it shatters you. Not because they failed, but because your illusion did. Carl Jung called it projection. You're not loving them. You're loving your reflection in them. You're trying to heal your wounds through their transformation. If you can just save them, maybe someone will finally come back and save you. That's why it feels so urgent, so necessary. Because fixing them is how you avoid facing what's broken in you. You didn't wake up one day and decide to lose yourself. It happened slowly, in moments where your worth was tied to someone else's growth, in relationships where love came with terms and your role was to fix. You didn't just love them. You disappeared into them. Their chaos became your identity. Their healing became your purpose. This is trauma bonding. You confuse intensity for intimacy, caretaking for connection, enmeshment for love. And every time you say, they just need more time, what you really mean is, I don't know who I am without this role, because if you're not saving them, who are you? You ignore the red flags. You rewrite the past. You create a fantasy inside your head, and then you move into it. Eckhart Tolle calls it self-dissolution. When your purpose is entirely tied to someone else's healing, you no longer exist as you. You exist as their savior, and nothing more. But reality keeps knocking, and every time they break a promise, or lie again, or disappear when you need them, you shrink a little more. You abandon your needs. You betray your boundaries. Not because you're weak, but because you've been trained to believe that love is something you earn, that suffering is the currency. You weren't born like this. You were trained for it. Maybe you grew up in chaos. Maybe love came with strings attached, conditional, inconsistent, always just out of reach. You learned to anticipate moods, solve problems, manage tempers, just to survive. You didn't become a fixer because you wanted to. You became a fixer because you had to. It wasn't a choice. It was survival. Psychologists call it the fawn response. You don't fight back. You don't run. You appease. You fix. You heal. Not because you want to, but because it's safer than the storm. Ask yourself, when did you first learn that your safety depended on someone else's happiness? When did you learn to read silence like it was shouting, to feel the shift in a room before anyone said a word? You call it empathy, but it's really hypervigilance, the instinct to sense danger before it arrives. Because if you can predict it, maybe you can stop it. But you can't. You never could. But here's the real price. Every time you save them, you lose you. You silence your needs. You swallow your truth. You become smaller and smaller, hoping that if you just sacrifice enough, it'll finally teach them to stop hurting you. But it never does. Because they're not learning. They're leaning. And every time you catch them, they lean a little harder. Because why would they grow when you've been carrying the weight for them? You can't heal people who benefit from staying broken. Some people don't want solutions. They want enablers. They want someone to absorb the cost of their chaos so they don't have to feel it. And deep down, you know it. But you stay. Not because you believe they'll change, but because leaving would mean facing you. Because if you're not saving them, who are you? If you're not putting out their fires, if you're not patching up their broken pieces, if you're not catching them every time they fall, then what's left of you? This is identity fusion. You didn't just love them. You disappeared into them. Their healing became your purpose. Their growth became your measure of worth. Because if you weren't saving them, you didn't know who you were. You call it love. You call it loyalty. But it's really self-erasure disguised as devotion. You set yourself on fire just to keep them warm. But they don't notice the smoke. They only feel the heat. Because your sacrifice doesn't teach them to change. It just teaches them that you're always there, ready to burn a little more. And if you don't stop now, you'll lose yourself completely in the process of trying to find them. This is emotional self-immolation. Burning yourself alive emotionally, hoping the fire will warm someone else. But it never does. You weren't wrong for loving them. You weren't wrong for hoping. You were just taught that your worth was measured by your usefulness. So you learned to love through service, to feel seen through sacrifice, to belong by being needed. Because somewhere along the way, you got the message that love is earned. That if you just bleed enough, stay long enough, hold them up long enough, it will finally be your turn. But here's the truth. Being needed isn't the same as being loved. They needed saving. You needed purpose. It felt like chemistry, but it was just codependency wearing perfume. The truth is, you were never just trying to fix them. You were trying to fix what broke in you, through them. That's why it felt so urgent, so consuming, so impossible to walk away. Because if they healed, maybe you would finally feel whole too. But that's not how healing works. Healing isn't vicarious. It isn't earned through martyrdom. It's earned through return. A return to the self that was abandoned in the process of trying to be enough. This is radical acceptance, understanding that you stop waiting for them to become what you need and finally become it for yourself. You weren't healing them. You were performing. You didn't learn to love. You learned to serve. You call it devotion. But really, it's emotional labor disguised as love. Carrying their burdens as if your back was built for it. Absorbing their chaos as if it's the price of admission. Can I still be loved if I'm not useful? Who am I without the crisis? What does it mean to exist without someone to rescue? Those are the questions that mark the rebirth, because real love, the kind that nourishes instead of drains, doesn't need you to shrink, perform, or fix. It just needs you to be. This is the difference between a savior and a partner. A savior sees pain and makes it their job. A partner sees pain and holds space without making it their identity. You don't need to earn love. You don't need to bleed to be seen. You don't need to carry what someone else refuses to put down. Let that sink in. Let it reprogram you. Attachment theory calls this anxious attachment. When your idea of love is tangled up in service and sacrifice, you learn to confuse belonging with being needed. And that part of you, the one that's been carrying the weight, the one that's been bleeding for love, deserves to come home. You don't need to fix anyone. You just need to stop abandoning yourself in the process. Not because you've stopped caring, but because you finally realized your peace is not a sacrifice you owe to anyone else's storm. Here's the truth. You can't heal the past by performing harder in the present. You can't redeem your childhood by fixing your partner. You can't save anyone who benefits from staying broken. You don't need one more apology. You don't need another redemption arc. You don't need proof they can change. You need to choose you, even if it feels like betrayal, even if it breaks your heart, even if they call you selfish, heartless, disloyal. Let them, because the person you've been betraying is the one you see in the mirror, and they've waited long enough. Philosophers call it self-sovereignty, the reclamation of the power you handed out in pieces. You've been building bridges to people who are content to watch you drown. It's time to build one back to yourself. So make a stand right now. Write it in the comments, I choose me. Let it echo in your bones, in your breath, in every choice you make from this moment forward. Because claiming your truth isn't just how you begin again. It's how you end the cycle. Who have you been trying to fix instead of healing yourself? Where have you confused intensity for intimacy? Where has your help become a way to avoid your own healing? Seeing this isn't shameful, it's sacred. It's the crack where the light finally gets in. Maybe that's why you're here. Not to find answers, but to remember that your wholeness was never in their transformation. It was waiting, in your choice to walk away. Because the only person who's been waiting to be saved is the one you see in the mirror. And maybe it's time Radical acceptance isn't resignation. It's waking up. It's ending the wait for them to become what you need and finally becoming it for yourself. You don't need another chance, another apology, another promise they won't keep. You need freedom. Freedom from the role of fixer. Freedom from the illusion of control. Freedom from setting yourself on fire just to keep them warm. Look in the mirror. That's the person you've been abandoning. That's the one you've been betraying. You weren't just trying to save them. You were trying to save you. But here's the truth. You don't need them to heal for you to be whole. You don't need them to change for you to be enough. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This is your chance to wake up, to stop calling it loyalty when it's really self-neglect, to stop calling it love when it's really self-abandonment. You don't need their redemption. You need your own. You've been pouring light into people who hand you darkness. You've been building bridges to people who burn them. You've been holding space for people who never show up. It's time to build something for you, to stop bleeding for people who aren't willing to clean up the mess. You can let it go. Not because you gave up, but because you finally woke up. And maybe for the first time in your life, you can say it out loud. I choose me. Not because you stopped loving them, but because you started loving you. This isn't just the end of the cycle, it's the beginning of you. Peace was never something you had to earn. It was something you had to claim. You've spent enough time trying to save people who don't want to be saved. It's time to rescue yourself. Because here's the truth. The person you were always meant to save was you. The next video is already waiting. I'll see you there. But more importantly, you'll see you there.